So you've started to talk about how you develop emotional literacy, and you have some really wonderful tools to support that. Will you talk more about how all the ways in which you develop your clients' emotional literacy?
Sure. Well, if you think about linguistic literacy, what would we do? Well, we teach people the alphabet, and then we teach them, how to sound things out and how to write. And with emotions, I think it's quite similar. What I begin with is the noticing piece, because this is something that I find most people don't have a practice of. They're very busy. They're engaged in things. They're doing things. They're not paying attention to what they're feeling. They're not paying attention to their emotions. And we've all had this experience, right? We're doing something that we really enjoy doing, or we're very engaged in gardening or painting. And then when we stop, what happens? We go, wow, I'm so hungry, or I'm so tired. Well, the tiredness or the hunger, it's not that they just suddenly appeared. It's that we noticed them. Oh, we put our attention on them, or we took our attention off something else and then they showed up. So that's the first piece. And often what I do is I have people do an exercise, for a week or two in between sessions, where they randomly stop 3 or 4 times a day and just simply notate the emotion, name the emotion they're in. And it sounds deceptively simple, but for most people, it's actually quite difficult to do that. And what's interesting is then to ask them to look at that bulleted list of all the emotions. They don't have to explain them. They don't have to figure them out, just name them. And to ask them questions like, what do you observe? And what are the patterns you see? And what emotions did you think might be there that are missing? Or what emotions show up much more than you expected them to show up? And suddenly, they have this awareness of emotions that is quite surprising to them, and sometimes to me as well. But that's a wonderful introductory, I think, exercise for people. I do it in my courses as well. But that noticing and the naming are, for me, the first two pieces. And then we can dig into the knowing piece as I think about it, which is really understanding what's the story or what's the information that an emotion is giving us or offering us. What's our impulse? What do we feel like doing? What's the purpose of that emotion? Like, why do we even have that emotion as a human being? So we build distinctions, but the final step, the fourth step for me, is learning to navigate using our emotions. So whether it's, okay, I'm looking forward, there's a meeting I have to go to, I think it's anxiety. Okay, but what emotion would serve that conversation better than anxiety? Is there one? There's nothing wrong with the anxiety, but is there an emotion that would serve that better in your view? And what is that? And how would you generate it? Or you find yourself stuck in an emotion, which often happens in coaching situations, and we don't try to get rid of that emotion, but the question is, if it's not serving you, again, what emotion would serve you better, and how do you get from here to there, which for me would be navigating. It's not controlling our emotions, it's really choosing how to get from here to there emotionally. And it's something that we can all learn to do, but nobody's ever shown us how to do it.
Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure I kind of caught the kind of this 4 steps you said. I think I heard you say the first step is noticing that I'm having an emotion, and then naming as best I can the emotion I'm having, and then kind of getting tapping into the story that's behind what's going on, the story behind the emotion, and then choosing, like, is that the emotion I want that's going to serve me best now? Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So noticing, naming, knowing, and navigating. So that's how I think about it.
Okay. Yeah. Love that. Beautiful. And I get the sense that there's things you have your clients do between sessions that begin to build some muscle, I'll call it, around their they're noticing, naming, knowing, navigating, kind of build some muscle.
Yep.
And I'm curious, what does it look like within a coaching session
Mhm.
to put emotions at the center.
Okay. So one of the things I share with my coachees up front is that, you're going to tell me a story. You're going to share with me what your experience is. And that story is, I think, supremely important. It's what looks like reality to you. But that story it emerges from certain emotions, right? So if you're talking to me about, oh, something's very unfair. Oh, well, for me, I'm hearing resentment, because resentment equals, right, the story of unfairness. And in resentment, we have a certain impulse and it has a certain purpose. So what I share with people up front is, I don't need to hear your whole story. What I need to hear is what's the core? What's the core of your breakdown or your challenge or your dissatisfaction? And I'm going to stop you probably pretty quickly to say, let's just talk about this from an emotional perspective. Okay, you're saying things are unfair. Here's how I hear unfair is resentment. Does that resonate with you? And then instead of talking about the unfairness, we start talking about the resentment. And why does it appear unfair to them? And what are their standards? What are their expectations, et cetera? And in the end, once they feel like they really understand why the resentment is there, then we come back to the question of, and where would you like to be, right? How would you like to feel? What would you like to be telling yourself? Because if the resentment you feel has you stuck, then okay, then it's your choice to go somewhere else. The only thing I would say is sometimes staying in an emotion is extremely helpful. Just because it's uncomfortable doesn't mean that we should want to change it as the coach, or even that our coachee should, is that sometimes we need to stay in sadness because it's telling us something really significant about a loss in our lives, something we care about. So just because an emotion is uncomfortable doesn't mean we should try to get rid of it. And this is part of the conversation I have with my coachees. Can they embrace all their emotions, the ones that are comfortable and enjoyable and the ones that are uncomfortable? Because those are all telling them something. They all have a purpose. But as soon as we start, again, segregating them between good and bad, positive and negative, and then we go for the ones that feel really good. And actually, that produces a life, in my view and in my experience, it's not particularly balanced. It doesn't give us the tools that we need when we experience those emotions that are difficult.